Welcome to Hyperfine Academy. Today we're doing a Revit Titleblock tutorial. We're going to go through all the steps to make this custom title block. You can always download it for free at hyperfinearchitecture.com/resources, but in this tutorial I'll show you how I made this one. The four basic steps we'll cover are creating the title block line work and line styles, creating new text styles for permanent text, creating new label styles and parametric labels for information you want to edit directly in Revit, creating your logo in Revit using lines, text, and filled regions, and we'll talk about how to make a parametric on-off watermark for things you might want to add, like a not for construction notice. Let's get started. Okay, so we're in a new blank Revit project, and the first thing I'm going to do is create a sheet, and I'm going to use the default title block that comes with Revit as the basis for my template. So if I select that sheet and do edit family, now I'm not in the Revit project anymore. I'm in the actual file for this title block family. So the first thing you want to do is save as, so you don't overwrite any of the standard Revit stuff. You might want to use that again later. So let's save, and now we've got a brand new clean file that we can work on and not worry about losing anything. All right, so now we're ready to get started editing. And the first thing we're going to do is change the size. And you saw that when I loaded that sheet, the default one that comes with Revit is the Arc E size, which is 3.6 by 2.6. And we really just want to do Arc D, which is 36 inches by 24 inches. So if I select these top two lines, hit MV, drag down, I'll make that 6 inches, and I'll drag this way, and I'll move that in 6 inches. And now that's going to be the Arc D 36 by 24 size that's more common, at least in residential architecture. Alright, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to save a couple of the labels and text that I know that I'm going to want, and I'm going to delete everything else. So if we zoom in, I know I'm going to want to reuse the sheet name, right? I don't need to recreate this from scratch. So the sheet number, the sheet name, the project name, the client name I might want, the project number I might want. So I'm just going to drag these things over here just so I can sort of save them for later. We'll take the drawn by also. The rest of this stuff I don't think I want, so I'm going to select all of it and delete. Alright, the next step, I'm going to readjust the margins. I think they're a little bit too big and I want more space for my drawings and for my title block. So if I select this line, I can see it's an inch. I'm just going to make that 1/2 inch all the way around. You can see I can just type in 0.5 and Revit knows that that's 1/2 inch. This margin on the left, we do want to keep this one a little bit larger because that's where your staples are going to go. So I got 1/2 inch everywhere and 1.5 on the left side. Let's clean this line work up with the trim command. Alright, so now we've got a clean 36 inch by 24 sort of canvas to use, and we'll start adding the stuff to make it our own style. Alright, so we'll start creating our line work. So the first thing I'm going to do is use the offset tool, and I'm just going to make it 1/4 inch. So I'm going to start my title block 1/4 inch from these margins that we just changed a little bit ago. So it's 1/4 inch from each side, and it's going to be 2.5 inches wide. I'm just going to use the trim command to trim these lines up. So I'm going to end up with a rectangle that's 2.5 inches wide, that's 1/4 inch from all the sides. Now I need to create some fields for the logo and other text. So I'm just going to hit CO, and if I drag all the way down here, I can just start typing in different values, and it's going to move them all down. So the first one's going to be 2.5 inches, so I get a square at the top. The next one's going to be 10 inches. The next one's going to be 3.5 inches. And one more, it's going to be 4.5 inches. So those are all the vertical blocks that I need. So the next thing I'm going to do is go up to Create, Line. I'm going to bisect this one in half. I'm going to go Create Line again. And I'm just going to sort of draw a little guide in here so I can get that half mark. And I'm going to bisect that one in half. So now I've got my line work set up. And what I'm going to do is change the line style. So to change the line style, we're going to go to the Manage tab and go to Object Styles. And here you see we already have some line work that are defined in the project. We want to make a new one, and we want to give it a custom name so that we can change it later when we get into Revit directly. So I'm going to call it halftone, and I'm going to make sure it's a subcategory of title blocks, and we'll hit OK. And there you see it's the default line weight 1 black solid. The only thing I'm going to do is change the color, and I'm going to pick this sort of gray 192. It's a pretty light gray. Now if I select all my lines, I selected more than I want, so I'm just going to deselect. So I have the lines we drew selected. Up here it's going to say what sort of category they are. So we'll select the one we just created, and now you can see it makes them that nice halftone sort of color that we wanted, and the border is still the dark black. Alright, so we have our line work finished. Now we're going to add some text notes. And text notes will be used for things that are going to be permanent and not changing basically from project to project. Things like headers and your company name, things like that. So I'll create a text note, and I'm just going to create the default one for right now. I'm going to call this Hyperfine Architecture. This will be the company name. And if we select the text note and edit type, you can see you can change a bunch of different parameters from the text note. So I'm going to duplicate this. I'm going to call it the text font, the size that I want it to be, and the color. So that way I can easily find it later. So I'm going to set the color. I'm going to set this orange color. I said it's going to be a 1/4 inch, which it already is, and it's going to be a Roboto medium. These fonts are included. If you download this title block on my resources page, these fonts are included in the file. So you see now I've changed that font to this size and this color. I'm going to drag this one into place. Right, so that is going to be a permanent fixture on this title block. It's not going to change in every project. We're going to want a couple different text types in here for different levels of information and just for the style. So I'm going to take the one we just created, and I'm going to copy it over, and I will edit type again. I'll duplicate it, and this is going to be, this one will be Roboto thin. It'll be an 1/8 inch, and it'll be gray. And I'm going to use this just to type in my address. And that's going to be another thing that's not going to change from project to project, right? Your company name or your company address, stuff like that, is not changing in every project. So I'm going to change the color, change the font, and change the text size, right? So now it's this light gray color. I'm going to expand it, and we can just type in what we want. I'm just going to type in a placeholder. Bring that into place, and now this is something you can edit in the title block, but you're not going to have to change it in every Revit project. Alright, I'll show one more text type we're going to do, and then I'll skip ahead. We're going to have a couple text types that we use for headers, things that sort of mark where information is. So if I'm going to edit this type again, I'm going to duplicate it, and we'll just call this one, I want it to be a little bit smaller, we'll call it 3/16. And this one is just going to be black. And 3/16. It's going to be the same Roboto medium font. And we're going to say drawn by. And to the right of this, which we'll go over soon, is going to be a label that is parametric that you can change in Revit. But the sheet is always going to say drawn by. And right here we'll say plot date. And so we'll have another parameter in here that automatically updates with the plot date, but your sheet will always say drawn by, it will always say plot date. Those things won't change. Okay, so I finished adding all the text notes. You saw me create these ones. I added a few more, one for project information, project number, and client information. So next we're going to create labels that go under all these fields that we can change and update in Revit in every different project without having to change the title block. Alright, so we finished our line work, we finished our text notes. We're going to move on to modifying the labels and putting the labels into place. And labels are objects in your title block that are parameter driven, which means that you can change them directly in Revit in every project. So we'll start here at the bottom with the sheet name and sheet number. And these are the these are the parameters, these are the labels that were in the sort of default Revit template that we started with that we thought we'd use again. And so instead of recreating them, I'm just going to drag them into place and modify them a little bit to look the way we want. So this is obviously the sheet number. I'm going to drag this into place. And if we look at the type, we can see it's a label. And so for labels, there's two things you're going to want to change. The text style, which is pretty much the exact same process we just did, and then the label to see what it's actually reporting. So I'm going to edit type, and right now we're just changing the text, which is similar to what we did previously. I'm going to make this one rubato medium. ¾ inch, and I'm going to use my blue color for this one. Alright, now it's too large. So what we're going to do is go to Label. With it selected, I'm in Label. So now we're editing what it's actually reporting. And you can see here's all the default, the standard things that these labels could report. We can always add more later, but these will get you pretty far. And so it's already set up to add sheet number, which is what we want. The only thing I'm going to do is change the sample value, because I'm more likely to report a sheet number with a letter and 3 numbers like that. So now I know that if I use sheet numbers of this format, it's going to fit in that position right there. All right, let's do the sheet name. And we see we have the sheet name label already right here. I'm just going to create it again just to show you as an example how it would be done. So I'm going to take the sheet number, I'm going to copy it down. I'm going to edit type because I want this to look different. So we just have to duplicate so I don't change the last one. I'm making a new type. I'm going to call this one ¼ inch gray. I'm going to use 50% gray. I'm going to change this to ¼ inch. And now it's a lot smaller. So to edit the label, this is still reporting the same sheet number. I'll do edit, and I want sheet name right down here. I'll click it over to add it to the right. I'm going to get rid of sheet number. And I'm going to type in something just for a sample value that's I'm most likely to use. First floor plan. Put that in place. Now we're done with these two labels. We have a few different label types that we still have to create. One of them will be this client name, which is going to go right here under client information. And I want it to look the same as project number, even though that's text, and there's going to be a project number label right here. The client name itself is going to be a label that we want to change with every project. So I'm going to make it look similar to this. The first thing I'm going to do is just use my match command to make it similar to that, because it's fewer changes to make. So this text was rubato medium 5/30 seconds. This is a label, but like we just covered, it still has a text component. So I'm going to duplicate it and make it that same size and color so that it looks the same, even though one of them's a label, one of them is text. We'll align it to the left. And drag it into place. We can change the label to be all caps, the sample value, just so it looks the same. And we have one last label type we want to create to fill in this plot date, drawn by, and some of the information up here. So you can see these are some of the ones that we already saved. So plot date is this one right here. I'm going to duplicate it. This one's going to be rubato thin 1/8 and gray. Now that I got that one looking the way I want, I can use MA, click on it, and then just click on the other ones that I want to change. And the other thing I want to change is I want them all to be left justified. So you see this one's left, this one's right, that one's right. If I select all of them, I can change, if they have a similar parameter to them, I can change them all. So I'm just going to drag this into place. I'll rotate that. I'll drag it into place. And the same thing with project number. I'll drag it into place. Now over here I want the client address. That one doesn't exist yet, so let's create it. It's going to be the same type. I want it to look the same. So if I just copy it over, now I'm editing, when I change the label, I'm editing this instance of this label. So even though it's going to continue to look the same, this particular selection right here is going to change to something different. So instead of project number, I'm going to want the project address. That'll probably be long, so let's stretch it out. And now my labels are complete, except for this large one right up here. Alright, I forgot the biggest label of all of them, the project name, so let's create that one. So project name is one of the labels that we saved from the default Revit project. I'll drag it into place. One good way, you can see it's always gonna, like if it's centered, it's gonna be hard to get it to match up perfectly with that space. You can always, and this works for text as well, set the alignment to the left, get it into place, then you can easily stretch the container to be the width you want, and then you can set it back to center. So we'll edit type, duplicate. This one is going to be called ostrich font. It's going to be 1 inch, and I'm going to use orange. Ostrich inline, 1 inch. And that's the project name, and that's a Revit parameter that you can change with every project. Now it's time to create the logo, and it's not as simple as just bringing in a JPEG. If this is something that you're going to be using this title block using over and over, and it's really part of your brand identity, you want to recreate your logo in Revit using only text, lines, and filled regions. Images and linked AutoCAD can have lots of problems in the long run. If you're using it for maybe one project, it's not that bad, but if you're doing this for long term, you definitely want to recreate your logo with Revit objects, and so that's what we're going to do here. So the first step though, I do have my logo in Illustrator. I exported it as a DWG from Illustrator, and I'm going to insert that so I can use that to trace over. So if I go to the Insert tab, Import CAD, and choose my logo, and say yes, it comes in down here. So you have to select it, unpin it, and now I can drag it up here where it's a little bit closer and I can begin to work with it. The first thing I'm going to do is I want to center it in this square, and I want to scale it smaller because it's obviously too big. So I'm going to draw myself some guidelines right here just so I can get the center of this box. And I'm going to do the same with the logo. Now if I select the logo, do my scale command, RE, I'm going to scale from the center point, I'm going to scale this distance, and I'm going to scale it smaller, and I'm just going to type in what I want. And I want the radius to be 1.125, that's 1 1/8 inches. So now I've got 2 1/4 across. If I select the logo, move, I'm going to move from this center point over to that center point, and now I know that it's centered. Alright, the first thing I'm going to do is recreate this Hyperfine in filled region. Filled regions are great, especially for blocky text like this. So if I select the logo, I'm just going to isolate it just so there's no confusion about what I'm looking at. And I'm going to create a filled region. And what I can do is use the line picker tool, and because this is DWG, these are line work that it recognizes. So if I hover over here, it's going to get that H. If I tab, it can cycle through the different options, and one of the options is going to be to do the entire line. So I'm going to do that for all the letters. And you can see it's not going to be perfect, but it's going to get about 90% of the way there. And we'll go over how to fix a couple of these errors in a minute after I try to close this out. Alright, so I think I got them all. Let me try and close it out. And no, it gives me an error. It didn't close all these lines. The problem we're going to see is that some of these lines get really small because this whole thing's only 2 1/4 inches across, right? So this is only a small fraction of an inch right here. So what I'm going to have to do is make this a square. It's not gonna let me draw that circle directly as a circle. So now that I have it squared out, I'll use the fillet arc command. I'll select both lines, and then it lets me round that corner out. If it was smaller than this, it might not work, but this is large enough that it'll work. So I had that problem twice with both the R's, or with the P and the R. And the other problem was down here at the bottom of the R. Like, that line is too small. You see, if I try to select it, it won't let me do it. If I try to draw it, it'll say it's too short. So what we're gonna have to do is draw the line down here, trim those up, and you see if I select the line and drag it up, there'll be a point where it gives me that little X symbol, and I know I'm not gonna be able to draw the line up here, but I can just drag it right there. That's as close as I'm going to get. It's going to look fine. So let's close it out. And if I isolate this, you can see it made it this filled region 1. So I'm going to duplicate this. I'm going to call it HF orange. We want it to be opaque. We want the color to be orange. Hit OK. And I want the cut fill pattern to be solid. So now I've got the Hyperfine done in Revit. The next thing I'm going to do is work on the line work, so I can make this circle and these horizontal lines. If I go to create line, I can use my line picker tool. It's going to work well for this horizontal line. It's not going to work for the circle if it does at all. So I'm just going to have to create that as a circle. I already have my center point marked out, so I'll start my circle there. I'll make it 1 1/4 inches. And I want to make another one of those that is going to be 3/16 inch radius. 13/16, I'm sorry. Alright, so I've got my 2 circles in there. If we select the logo, hide it, you can see those are my line work, right? I'm going to keep working. I will temporarily hide that Hyperfine. I'll temporarily hide that center mark. And now this middle portion isn't supposed to be there. So if I do split line and cut this part out and cut this part out, I can use the trim command to trim away the portions of that inner circle that are cutting through into the middle field. Now I want to edit the line work to make it look how we want it to look. So if I go to the Manage tab, go to Object Styles, we can see there's already some line works that are set up, including the halftone one that we did. So I'm going to make 2 more. I'm going to make one for the outline of the Hyperfine lettering, and I'm going to make one thick one for this sort of seal part of the logo. So if I do New, I'll make a Hyperfine. I'm just going to call it Heavy. I want it to be a subcategory of title blocks. And I'm going to make that 6. I'll do another new one. I'm going to call it Hyperfine Medium. And I'm going to make that 2. And we'll see how that works out. So I want to hide the logo. I'm going to select the seal part of the lines. And I'm going to make these heavy. When I select the filled region, if I do Edit Sketch, I can then select the line work and set that to be medium. And I think that's going to give me a nice outline on that text that I'm looking for. I have one more portion of the logo that I want to make with filled regions and lines. It's these 2 symbols. So if I select this filled region and do Create Similar, I can use my Pick Lines tool, and it's actually going to work for these circles. But I don't want them to be outlines. I just want it to be a solid orange dot. So I'm going to select both those lines and change them to invisible style. And I want this filled region to be the orange. So we'll hit OK. If I isolate that, you can see I just have 2 orange circles, no outlines. And then I want to make a line for these, and I'm going to have to create a line and then change the line type. So I've created that line right there. If I go to Manage, Object Styles, I'll make a new one, HF Orange, make sure it's under title blocks. And I'm going to set it to that orange color I've been using. And I'll make it a little bit thicker. If I select both those lines, now I can make them that line type. So that's where we are so far with the logo. Alright, now I need to do the rest of the text on the logo. And I would have liked to do this with filled regions, but the Linework was just too small. It wasn't accepting any of it. So we're going to have to use actual letters, actual Revit text, and array them in this circle. While the video is paused, I created a new text type just for this little piece of text right here. And I also created a text type for the circle, and so we'll create that now. So if I make text, I'm just going to make the R, and the text for these portions of the logo is the Roboto Medium 1/8. So I'm going to zoom in, and I have to do this one letter at a time because there's no other way to array the text. So I'm just going to get it close to what the original goal was. And with that text selected, I'm going to do the array command, AR. I'm going to make it a radial array. I do not want to group and associate. And I want to make the total number of letters that I want. And so it's 12 letters, and I'm going to make a letter here for the space just to make sure I get a space in there. You can see where it's trying to array from right at the center of that letter, but you can select that. We're going to move it down to our center point that we've used. I'll come up here, select, now drag this way, and I'm just going to type in a number, and about 7 degrees has been working well. And I just forgot to do exactly what I said, which was type in the total number that I want. So I want 13. Drag this down and try that again. All right. So it's going to look easier if I select all of those. I will select my drafting guidelines. This helps. So now what I'm going to have to do is go through and click into each of these letters and change them. So I'm going to pause the video while I do that. Okay, so you see I clicked into each individual letter along this thing and changed it to spell out what I want. And now I've got to do a little bit of editing. So the first thing I'm going to do is bring this T a little bit closer. So if I select the T, start my rotate command is very similar to array. I want to make the center point down here at the center of our circle. And I'm just going to eyeball this and bring it closer, and I think that looks pretty good. Now you can see that it's a little bit shifted to the right because this word is longer. So this was the top line of that horizontal line of our logo. This is just a new guideline. If I select the letters, I can rotate all of them from the center point always, and I'm just going to bring it over a little bit to the left so that it's a little bit more even. That wasn't quite enough, so I'll do it again. And I think that's going to end up looking pretty good. Okay, now we'll work on the bottom part. Alright, so I've started the bottom text. I created an S, I aligned it. I'm going to do the same command again. Array, I'm going to make 15 elements. I want to start from the center point, and I'm going to space it 8 degrees because that's what I did at the top one. Then I just have to repeat that process again. I'm going to pause the video while I do that, but basically what I have to do is click into each individual letter and change it. Okay, so you see I've typed in all the letters. I've done a little bit of fixing up to try to correct how this finish looked. And now I want to do the same thing where I just fix the centering of it. So I'm going to select all. I'll deselect those letters at the top. And I'll rotate and make sure I set the center of rotation at the center point. I think that's going to look pretty good. I'll hit HR. So the logo is done. What we need to do now is delete the DWG symbol. I can delete these guidelines. Turn on thin lines. So that's what it's going to look like in Revit now. And this is going to be consistent in every Revit project That could be a problem if you're using a DWG or some other linked file. So this is going to be very consistent now, and our logo is done. Our title block is almost complete. All right, we only have a couple of things left to do. One of them is a little bit of file management. What we're going to do is go to Manage, Purge Unused, because we've got a lot of stuff in this project that we don't really care to use anymore, like text, right? All these text types, we don't need them in the project because we're not using them. So if we select all of these, and we'll do the same thing with the label types, right? Because we create our own custom labels. We don't need these Revit default ones. We'll just select those, hit OK, and now they're not in the project anymore. So if I want to create new text, the only text that's in the project are elements that have been used. So now I'm going to do this not for construction symbol. And I'm going to do TX and just type in not for construction. And we'll choose the largest text font that I had. We'll make it even bigger. And we'll make it a light gray, so it's more of a watermark. Right, so you can put this wherever you want. A lot of times you'll see it just horizontally right here. Sometimes people like to put it all over the sheet. Like that. Whatever the case, we'll select these, and where it says visible, we'll hit this little checkbox to the right to create a new parameter. So it's saying there's no parameter. We're creating a parameter to control the visibility. One doesn't exist, so we have to create one. So we'll say add parameter. We're going to call it not for construction. And we're going to leave it as a type, which means that it's going to turn on or off in the edit type window for every sheet in your project that you use this for. And we'll hit OK. And we'll hit OK. And I'll show you how this works when we get into the project. Okay, so I have saved the title block, I've loaded into a project, and I've created a new sheet with the title block. So here you can see the difference between text and labels, right? So if we zoom in, this was a big label, right? So if I do a soft double click, I can open up that label and I can type directly into it. So I'm changing the project name. I can do the same thing with some of these things like project number, client address, that type of thing. Same thing with the drawn by and the sheet name and number. If we see the drawn by, it says author. I'm going to change that to my initials. You can see now that I'm in the view, that drawn by is a parameter that Revit puts by default in every view that we have access to. Same thing with sheet name and number. So I'm just going to call this one A101 floor plan. All right, all this stuff is updatable. Right here where we typed Hyperfine architecture, that's text and address, we can't change that, right? You have to double click, come back into your actual title block family and change it here. So the other thing is this not for construction, right? So if we select the title block, edit type, now you can see there's this not for construction checkbox. If I check it off, that goes away because it was a visibility parameter. And that is the end of this tutorial. If you liked it or have a request for another tutorial topic, please leave a comment. You can download this title block for free at hyperfinearchitecture.com. Check out the resources page for other free Revit assets. The link will be in the description below. The logo we were working on was specific to a course I'm developing right now. It's an in-depth look at using Revit for residential projects. You can read about that on the courses page of the website. Thanks for watching, make sure to subscribe, and check back soon for more free Revit tutorials.